I'm Karen Curry Parker. I want to start today with a little bit of gratitude because when we look at the human design chart and we look at the energy for gratitude and where it lives in the chart, gratitude goes hand in hand with innovation. You can't innovate if you're not grateful, meaning you really can't change a situation that you're hating on, because if you're hating on it, you're just going to create more of it, because that's how creativity works, right? Those are the meanings we hold, and we look at how those meanings create. You're going to start a process today that's going to take some time. You're not going to be able to do it in this little session. I'm going to give you a pretty big homework assignment. In that homework assignment, you're going to be looking at planetary placements in your chart in the context of your life purpose, how to find your life purpose in your chart. I'm going to walk you through the how today of looking at your chart and really contemplating some of these key parts that we're going to talk about. So your chart tells you your big why. It's going to tell you who you are and why you're here. And knowing how to interpret that really starts to sometimes, I think, make sense of your life. So I'm going to walk you through a template that I want you to use is going to help you really explore the meaning of your chart. So I'm going to lay it out for you. I want you to spend the next couple of days really exploring this. The biggest question that people ask me a lot is, why am I here? and sometimes we think that there's something we're supposed to do as part of why we're here. And that might be true for some of us, but really all of us are here to grow and evolve. And ultimately, your life purpose is about growing and evolving into the fullest expression of who you really are. So I want you to really grok that on every level of your being. Your life purpose isn't about what you do. It's not a class you have to teach, a book you have to write, something you have to accomplish. That's all nice and fun, and I'm not saying that won't be part of it. But your real life purpose is to be the fullest expression of who you are designed to be. That's your job. Be you. Be the best you possible. I know that sounds hokey, but that's your job. So we have to explore for a second that part of what's possible for us in the exploration of that story is that over the course of the exploration of that story, we learn to love ourselves. We learn to recognize that we are an irreplaceable, vital part of the cosmic plan, and consequently, we're divinely supported by Source. That we are in physical bodies. This is the gate 46, by the way. The gate 10 is love yourself. The gate 25 is learning your right place in the cosmos. The gate 46 says we're here to really love having an embodied physical experience for our soul. That's that third dimensional juju we do that's so unique to being a human being. And then as part of that, we're designed to really experience all the sensual delights of being human and nurture and love our bodies. And with the gate 15, we learn that we're not only here to learn to love ourselves, we're also here to learn to love each other. And that when we love ourselves and we fill our own cups to overflowing with our self-love and the consequent creation of abundance that we have more to share. Our cups run over and we have a saucer that's brimming of resources and love and ideas and possibilities that we then can give to others. We also know that we get direction for our self-expression and for who we are in the world when we love ourselves enough to allow ourselves, this is the gate 2, to receive everything that we need to fulfill the full story of who we are. We love ourselves when we are in collaboration with each other and we recognize and own our own power and influence over our own life path. When we are loving ourselves, and by design, we are designed to seek our direction from the fulfillment of the story of who we are. And the gate 13 teaches us that we're actually allowed to co-create, if you will, or have sovereignty over the narrative we tell about who we are. And that narrative is part of setting the tone and direction for our lives. If you want to know how to find your direction, there are, of course, some quote unquote hacks. I hate that word, but I'll use it anyway. There are some hacks in human design. The first hack being follow your design, strategy, and authority, right? Live true to your type. That helps you find your direction. The second thing we can draw on, if you will, is we also have to learn how to trust our intuition. And specifically for those of you, especially who have splenic authority, That doesn't mean you don't have a spleen. If your spleen is white, it means your spleen is variable, by the way, which means your intuition operates in many different ways if you have an open spleen, and usually functions in one or two specific ways if it's defined. You have to follow your intuition, that gut level feeling, that connection to your inner wisdom. Number 3, the emotional solar plexus teaches us, and the sacral does too, by the way, we're also designed to find our direction by doing what feels good. Your direction isn't going to have punishment or suffering in it. You're designed to follow what feels good. By the way, the bulk of my coaching with my clients, when I coach people, the bulk of what I do is to help people give themselves permission to follow what feels good. And like it or not, and this is kind of interesting, we're also designed to be challenged by finding our direction, especially if you have this channel defined. We need challenge. Challenge is an important part of growth. Now, notice that I said challenge and not suffering. There's a difference between challenge and suffering. But we are designed to kind of bump up against the edge of things that challenge us, that push us out of our comfort zone, that cause us to have to expand the edges of the narrative we're telling about who we are, so that we expand in our sense of capability and capacity. What we see in the chart is that there's an infrastructure, if you will, for our personal growth and evolution that is coded into the chart by the planets. The planetary positions tell us about our intuition, our type and strategy, our instinct, what feels good, and even some of the things that are going to challenge us. So in the next little bit, I want to break down for you some core elements of the planets and the gates, and how you can interpret those planetary positions when you start rewriting the full story, the narrative you tell about who you are and why you're here. So there's a mythology, if you will, a story in the chart. And I'm going to tell you or teach you how to start writing or rewriting or reframing that story you tell about who you are. So when we look at what defines the big why or your life purpose in the chart, we're going to be looking at a couple of key components. We're going to be looking at the Incarnation Cross. We're going to be looking at the KIRON position. We're going to be looking at Saturn and Jupiter and the relationship they have together. We're going to be looking at the moon. We're going to be looking at the planet Neptune. And we're going to be looking at the nodes in your chart. And as we do this, I want to just lovingly and gently say, this process that I'm going to be giving you, or this project I'm going to be giving you, isn't always easy. Especially for those of you who tend to be more linear in the way in which you think. I'm inviting you to drop into the sensual process of storytelling, which means I don't want you to literally interpret a gate and a planetary position. I want you to do this with a little bit of imagination, a little bit of creativity, a whole lot of fun. I want you to do this if finding the language or interpreting the language or trying to find a way of saying something just feels really clunky, uncomfortable, and it doesn't resonate with you. I want to give you permission to take this process off your computer and either go do it by hand or go do it with art. If you need to take the process of redefining the narrative and turn it into a poem or an art project or a painting or a mask or anything, go play with it. And if you really get stuck, if you're sitting there and you're just stuck in your head and you can't figure it out, go take a walk, go take a hot shower, go do something to get yourself out of your head, out of that stressed out cortisol adrenaline place where you're feeling pressure to figure this out, and drop into a place where you expand on your mind's capacity to be creative. And you release dopamine and serotonin by engaging in a joyful process, a joyful experience that takes you out of your head and back into your body. It's pretty normal to kind of struggle with this process. It's pretty normal to wrestle with it a little bit, but it's okay. It's part of the cultivating and culling through what feels good and right for you. This is your opportunity to define for yourself your life purpose. You don't need to consult somebody else necessarily to really help you figure this out. You know, when I do life purpose readings for people, again, it's always important, I think, personally, and I think always essential to get a human design specialist to really help you unravel the mystery of your chart. There are things that they know that it would take you a couple of years to study and integrate. But when I give somebody a life purpose reading, number one thing they say is, oh my God, I feel so confirmed. I feel like you validated everything. You already know, whether you think you don't, you already actually know your life purpose. There's something in you that already knows this. There's a certain amount of power in defining it for yourself and not turning that over to someone else to do for you. Basically, what we're going to do is you're going to take the theme of the planet, because this is how this works in the chart. The theme of the planet basically highlights a gate. So it's almost like the planetary theme in your chart shines on a particular archetype. So in this particular chart, the sun, the circle with the dot in it, shines on the 14 in line 3. Okay? Shines on the 14 in line 3. So so when you look up this chart, you'll see, if this was your chart, you would look up the meaning of the gate 14 and you would interpret it through the sun. So we know that the sun is what you're here to give the world. So you would say, what I'm here to give the world is the 14 in line 3, right? We're not going to worry about the lines for all intents and purposes right now. So let's start with this. The Incarnation Cross in the story of your chart is what I like to call the plot outline. It's the big picture of your purpose. And if you only interpret your Incarnation Cross, it's going to give you a lot of information about who you are and what you're here to do. The Incarnation Cross really comprises energetically about 70% of your chart. So the bulk of your chart is really heavily weighted in the position of these top 4 numbers. What's called the conscious, that's the black, and the unconscious sun, and the conscious and the unconscious earth. The earth is the symbol with the plus sign in it. The top one, the circle with the dot in it, is the symbol for the sun. So your Incarnation Cross is comprised of these 4 numbers. Now, many of you have Incarnation Crosses and they're on your chart and you're like, I don't know what that means. I'm not a huge fan of most of the ways that the Incarnation Crosses are described or taught. So your Incarnation Cross is these top 4 numbers. Your KIRON is the gate that eliminates your spiritual challenge and your spiritual purpose. So KIRON, we sometimes call the wounded healer. If you are a 6-line profile, so if you are a role model profile, your KIRON is very important, but I actually think it's important for everybody because it's really, I think at this point, it's really the true midlife point in the chart. KIRON comes into a return position between the ages of 48 and 52, which is really the awakening of the mature self. But KIRON in the chart itself tells you your spiritual challenge and part of your spiritual purpose. So your KIRON is kind of like, I like to think of it as the gift that keeps on giving. Or if you've ever heard the expression new level, same devil, that oftentimes is going to be illuminated by the position that KIRON holds in your chart. Whatever your KIRON, whatever archetypes or gates your KIRON is lighting up in your chart, that's going to tell you a lot about what you're going to wrestle with every time you go through a growth cycle or a maturing cycle. And as you wrestle with it and you mature with it, once you hit maturity with it around 50, it becomes part of what you, from your mature perspective, what you're here to give back to the world, what you're here to teach the world. So I always like to look at KIRON. KIRON does not show up on the natal chart, so you're not going to see it in the body graph. But again, if you get a chart from us, it will be in the numbers. So make sure you have KIRON on your chart. If not, go run a chart on our chart site because your KIRON chart from us will have KIRON on it. And that KIRON placement tells you a lot about what do you have to push against every time you go through a growth cycle. By the way, what you're going to find as you go through this process is that there are core themes. They might be different gates, but they have similar themes that are going to show up in every level of your chart because nothing in your chart is there by accident. It's all part of a beautiful story that's going to outline for you your soul curriculum, what you're here to learn and explore over the course of your life. Saturn is a beautiful, I love Saturn. I'm probably one of the only few people on the planet that says I love Saturn, but I do love Saturn. Saturn is oftentimes in astrology called the great teacher. Some people call Saturn the great destroyer. The Saturn placement in your chart is another place where you're going to look for a maturing cycle or a maturing energy. Whatever Saturn is highlighting is a place where you have to push through. It's an energy you oftentimes have to push through in order to grow. In traditional alchemy, when we go back to the alchemy schools of, or the wisdom schools of Alexandria, the mystery schools of Alexandria, in the process of alchemy that they taught there, it was the energy of Saturn that burned away the dross. So it's the energy of Saturn that oftentimes blows things up that are in our way. So an example of how Saturn might work is, or how you might experience Saturn is this: if you if you have a Saturn placement, let's say around the 34, something associated with work, and you hate your job, and you go through a Saturn cycle, what Saturn might do while you're in this cycle where you hate your job, Saturn might cause you to get fired or laid off. That's Saturn removing an obstacle out of your path. It oftentimes can feel like the bottom has dropped out of our reality, but in hindsight, we can often see that Saturn sort of cleans the slate. It clears the path. So when you look at your Saturn placement in your chart, it's really telling you what you have to work with, what you have to grow through, what you sometimes have to push through as part of your maturity. When you master the challenge of Saturn, by the way, that Saturn cycle or that Saturn challenge gets highlighted at the end of your 20s and at the end of your 50s as you move into 60. However, that being said, that doesn't mean that you don't experience it over the course of your life. You're always going to be wrestling a little bit with your Saturn, but there are certain times in life cycles where it tends to get activated more intensely. So at the end of your 20s and the end of your 50s, this is something really important to pay attention to. Saturn, when we master this challenge of Saturn, we look then to Jupiter, because Jupiter tells us a lot about the rewards we're going to receive when we master our Saturn challenge. So Jupiter tells us a lot about the pathway of wealth into your life. It's going to tell you, especially if you're stuck or blocked with money, what you need to look at that might be keeping you stuck or blocked. Because if you're not in the flow of abundance or you're not receiving the blessings of Jupiter, you want to look at your Saturn and see, is there something in your Saturn that you need to pay attention to so you can activate these blessings? Or is there something going on that's keeping you from allowing yourself to live the high expression of the gates in your Jupiter? Or the gates being highlighted by your Jupiter. The moon, the energy of the moon, is actually what drives us. So your moon, the energy of the moon, is what drives you. Oftentimes you want to look at your moon if you're feeling like you've lost your drive or your motivation. Go look at your moon. Because a lot of times what's happening is whatever we need, whatever our moon is telling us we need to stay inspired and motivated and driven is not being met. So you have to really look at how can you activate that lunar theme more successfully in your life so you can get your drive back. Neptune, the placement of Neptune, is going to show you a lot about where or how you connect to source. And it's going to tell you about your spiritual purpose or your spiritual job. So when we're looking at spiritual life purpose, which I always like to bring up with you guys because I find most of my clients are really concerned about what's my spiritual purpose? What's my soul purpose? It's all your soul purpose. But Neptune tells you a little bit about how do you connect spiritually? What do you need to have in place so that you feel spiritually connected and supported? And as we saw when we went to the G Center, that's part of self-love, right? And where do perhaps your spiritual gifts lie for some of you? When we look at that in the context of KIRON, the masterful expression of KIRON, that gives us oftentimes a really nice sneak peek into what are you here to do spiritually? What are you here to give and share with the world as part of your spiritual purpose? The nodes of your life, these aren't necessarily in the template, but I like to look at the nodes just because the nodes kind of tell us what we need to have in place. Our south node foundation, by the way, the south node is the one on the right. That's the bottom one. The south node says this is the theme of your youth until the age of 40. This is what you're learning until you turn 40. This is what used to be the old midlife, right? This is what you're learning until the age of 40. It's the foundational thing you need to have in place in order for you to grow into the north node. And that north node is telling us where we're growing, what we're growing towards. All right, so your south node theme is the theme of your youth. It's what you need to master in order to move into your north node theme, the theme of your maturity. I like to put this here just because it does give us a little bit of insight into what we're working with thematically. So we like to explore that just in terms of what were you here to learn in your youth. If you're past 40, if you're before 40, you're still learning it. And after 40, it's what do we need to master? What are we growing into? What's the theme of our mature self-expression? Which is why I like to look at that. So let's put this all together for just a minute. Let's do this together. So here's Nelson Mandela's chart. Nelson Mandela has his sun in the 62 conscious and in the 3 unconscious. So the sun, the solar expression, the sun is what you're here to give to the world. So whatever you have in your sun is what you're here to give to the world. So what we see is that Nelson Mandela was the 3, innovative, was here to share innovations around what we need to do, what possibilities we need to expand on in order to Earth, connect with deeper truths, and shift and change what we value in the world. That was his life purpose, to change the value system, to innovate the value systems, to crack us open to new possibilities, to realign those possibilities with higher truths, and then to share those higher truths with the world. Those of you who maybe didn't know, Nelson Mandela was a projector. He has the gate 33, which is oftentimes an energy that's associated with prison or imprisonment in his Saturn position, right? So part of his Saturn challenge was learning to release himself energetically from prison so that he could take leadership and then make a contribution to humanity, a compassionate, enthusiastic contribution to humanity, right? So here we have sort of that big piece. When we look at Nelson Mandela, we see that his Neptune, his spiritual purpose, was in redefining and stepping into leadership. So, that's totally true about Nelson Mandela. His South Node was about leadership and divine leadership, listening to source and following source's direction to step into the full expression of his leadership. His mature expression was about translating his ideas into ways in which we can increase integrity in the world. His moon was in the 43, innovative thinking, and again, the 62, using innovative thinking to change the way in which we think about potentials and possibilities in the world. His KIRON, I love this. You see, this was a very spiritually based person, right? KIRON is in the 25 in line 6 and line 3. So his KIRON was all about reconnecting people with their right place in the world, their connection to source, to anchoring people in greater truths, bigger truths, reframing values in bigger truths so that they can be living more in alignment with their divine and right place in the world. So as you go through this process, I want you to hear my voice in your head that says, thank you for being you. Because as you go through this process, I hope you remember that as you have a once in a lifetime chart, it's never been a chart like yours before. It's never going to be a chart like yours again. You are a once in a lifetime cosmic event. We are who we are because you are who you are. Bye.